But first to another extraordinary story about our troubled criminal justice system. It's the story the Director of Public Prosecution, Stephen Polaris, didn't want the jury in a current murder case to see. While we make no reference to the matters before the court, we are questioning the past performance of an expert witness in the DPP's case, State Forensic Pathologist Dr Cala. You might ask why the DPP would object to a jury having access to all the details before considering its verdict. Still, that's not new in this state. But that aside, alarm about Dr Cala's work was raised recently over a case in New South Wales in which he mistook a double murder for a motor vehicle accident. However, we've been troubled by Dr Cala's conduct since he first came to Adelaide 3 years ago. And what we've discovered raises to a new level the urgent need for an inquiry into how our justice system has operated over many years. Here's Graham Archer.
It's the most serious situation that I've ever been able to contemplate. In all of my research, we haven't had anything like this in any other state, or indeed overseas.
If ever you wanted evidence of how by ignoring one justice system scandal, others can follow, this is it.
It's a complete Pandora's box, Graham. I mean, if they lift the lid any higher, how many more might pop out? How many more Henry Keoghs are out there?
That was just 3 weeks ago. Now our floundering forensic science fraternity have this to deal with.
When Bill and Pam Weightman's bodies were discovered in their car 6 years ago, Dr Cala found it was an accident. What he missed was that the Weightman's son David had drugged them and smothered them before rolling them down the embankment.
These terrible events have been known to Today Tonight for some time, but until recently the details have been suppressed. It's an extraordinary story of how a boilermaker recognised the signs of murder from day one when the experts failed to do so.
Initial investigations appear that the vehicle has, for some unknown reason, left the road and then gone down an embankment.
Most telling, though, was forensic pathologist Dr Cala, now working in Adelaide, found nothing suspicious despite unmistakable signs that the couple had met with foul play. Cala even laughed at suggestions of murder which were put to him by horrified family members. Because of his blunder, the killers were allowed to go free for years and would never have been caught at all if it hadn't been for the relatives who eventually forced the slain couple's adopted son to confess to murder.
Well, I thought, what a tragedy. Here we have a case where some people have been murdered, and it was written off as an accident. Now, sadly, in South Australia, we're all too familiar with that sort of scenario. But every time it happens, it's terribly sad for the family and for everybody involved.
The whole unbelievable story will eventually be told in full, and trust us, there's much more. In the meantime, Dr Cala continues to work in Adelaide. However, when he started as our acting Chief Forensic Pathologist in early 2003, he'd already been in trouble interstate. Trouble which led to the body snatchers inquiry in 2001.
For years, staff at Glebe Morgue removed organs and bones and practised plastic surgery without relatives either knowing or consenting.
He was one of those caught unlawfully supplying body parts from autopsies to other scientists for unrelated research without authorisation. Human bodies treated like this.
They're just lumps of meat with names on them. That's all they are. That's all they can be.
In one case, Dr Cala ordered the skull of a deceased person to be smashed with a hammer to record injury patterns. Naturally, the conduct appalled public authorities and the stricken relatives.
It's totally inappropriate for these sort of practices to continue, and we have to make sure that that they are prevented.
Though no action was taken against those involved, in the inquiry findings, Dr Cala was singled out as the only pathologist who wouldn't accept that what he'd done was inappropriate.
Only Dr Cala, one of the pathologists on the Institute staff, appeared partly to contest this.
Of course, none of this appears in Dr Cala's application for the Adelaide job, acquired by Today Tonight under Freedom of Information back in December 2003, when we first had concerns about his fitness for the position. All the while, his biggest blunder was yet to surface. Do you have to wonder about how exacting the selection process was that we employed?
Well, of course, because for these incredibly important tasks, it's very important to make sure that we have exactly the right person in the right job.
What we have discovered is that when Dr Cala gained entry to the Royal College of Pathologists, enabling him to work as a forensic expert back in June 1994, his examiner for the college was none other than disgraced forensic pathologist Dr Manock.
I was absolutely horrified, and the main reason being because it seems that Dr Manock was involved in passing somebody for an examination, and it was an examination that he'd never taken himself.
So Dr Manock gave us Dr Cala?
Absolutely.
Author of 2 books about Dr Manock's flawed forensics, Bob Moles, is shocked by the news. Could things get much worse?
Well, they're already much worse than I ever contemplated they could be, so therefore it's very difficult to imagine how they could possibly be worse.
Personally, emotionally, I feel outraged.
I mean, here's the potential for killers to go free and never be caught.
Yes.
Disturbed too is Professor Maciej Henneberg, a forensic anthropologist, who says the work of experts like Dr Cala should be routinely checked to ensure accuracy.
Since opinions of expert witnesses are scientific, well-informed, unbiased opinions, they should be subjected to peer review.
So we've had a history of lone rangers, if you like.
Yes, and that's where the problem lies.
The extent of the potential damage done by Dr Manock was highlighted recently by the release of confidential medical board documents written by senior pathologists scathing of Dr Manock's performance in the Keogh case.
The conduct of the autopsy and the quality of the resulting evidence was markedly substandard to the point of incompetence.
Add to that his failed leadership of our forensic science service for 3 decades.
Dr Manock was not just a senior pathologist, he was the chief forensic pathologist for the state. He had the opportunity and indeed the responsibility over many years to raise the standards, to introduce up-to-date systems, guidelines and protocols. On the evidence of the Cheney autopsy, he did not.
Those documents raised pressing questions about how the medical board then came to exonerate him. But now heaped on top, we have this further alarming aspect of Dr Manock's legacy.
The human fallout, sadly, is much broader, wider and deeper than anyone would really like to contemplate.
It was well known that Dr Manock himself had never done the appropriate study or examinations to properly qualify as a forensic pathologist, let alone be made the department head. The state government has even admitted taking a risk with Manock's employment in Adelaide right from the very start. When he was first employed in 1968, they knew that he didn't have the proper qualifications, didn't they?
Yes, they did, because it said on the court record that they knew he didn't have the proper qualifications, and in that respect they were taking a bit of a risk. But they had assumed that he would get the qualifications soon after he was appointed.
And did he?
No.
He never did?
He was given the qualifications some years later without having to take the examinations for it.
Yet he was allowed to practice as our chief forensic expert for 3 decades. But equally shocking, as we've now learnt, he was also given the power to pass or fail other hopefuls like Dr Cala wishing to become forensic pathologists. Not only was he not properly qualified, but from the beginning, many of his cases were considered suspect, and he received significant public criticism. Take the Emily Perry case, which goes back to 1981. When the attempted murder charges that were laid largely because of Dr Manock's work were set aside by the High Court, what did they say about that?
One of the judges in his High Court judgment said that the forensic evidence that had been provided in that case was not fit to be taken into consideration, and that represented an appalling departure from acceptable standards.
And that was 1981?
That's right, yes.
So that judgment's been around for 25 years.
But everybody in the field would have known about that judgment and what it said.
The most notorious, however, was his awful failure to correctly diagnose the deaths of 3 babies in the early 90s and, like Dr Cala, enabled potential killers to go free. So was it appropriate that at the very time these much publicised errors were being reviewed by the coroner, Manock was judging others, hoping to become forensic experts, and as such, he passed Dr Cala? Does it surprise you that Dr Manock was nominated as an examiner when the Royal College of Pathologists must have known then about his history?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are matters of public record for many years past now. And the idea that Dr Manock would be accepted as an examiner at the very time when his own conduct was in question in relation to the baby deaths is a shocking situation.
Cala may well have qualified anyway, but we do know Manock passed him after only 6 months specialist training, when up to 2 years is what's considered the proper standard. Should we really be surprised at what we're facing now?
Well, no, we shouldn't be surprised, because this has been coming for a very long time. If you don't properly inquire into things when they are plainly incorrect and brought to your attention, then of course they can only get worse.
And from the start, Dr Cala's conduct in Adelaide was not what's expected of an objective scientist. At the Attorney-General's nasty bidding, he produced a vicious and grossly inaccurate report attacking Professor Tony Thomas, the pathologist who'd exposed Manock's baby death bungles, and later raised serious concerns about aspects of Manock's work in the Keogh case. Now, that was a pretty dirty business, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a very shabby affair.
Today Tonight is also aware of various other mistakes Dr Cala has made since coming to Adelaide. Amongst them, initially misdiagnosing a violent multiple stabbing as a suicide, and later mistaking a body part in the Gladstone munitions explosion, causing the search for the 3rd victim to be temporarily abandoned. Cala also misused his government role in offering unsubstantiated opinions in a private complaint intended to stop Today Tonight's inquiries into the Keogh case. When we objected, his boss, Dr Hilton Kobus, simply brushed the issue aside. Only when we went to the minister was Dr Cala reminded that his government position wasn't for personal use. And is it appropriate for a state pathologist to allow himself to get embroiled in the cloak and dagger world of politics?
Absolutely not. And it's as clear as can be in the Royal Commissioner's report on the Splat case that the forensic pathologists, the scientists involved, have to stick strictly to their job as scientists and not be detracted into any of the other side issues.
Quite rightly, there's calls now to review Dr Cala's previous work, but by some of the same people who've been desperately protecting Dr Manock. Clearly, we can't stop there now that history has repeated itself, and particularly considering we can effectively thank Dr Manock for Dr Cala. It seems a little hollow when you consider Dr Manock's history, doesn't it?
Well, it not only seems hollow, it seems unfair, because with due process, it actually means that people who find themselves in similar situations would be subjected to the same process. So if we're going to have an inquiry into Dr Cala's cases, then it's self-evident that we should be having an inquiry into Dr Manock's cases too.
There is no such thing as lesser justice or greater justice. The case is either justly resolved or unjustly resolved.
The whole sorry business needs to be cleared up for the sake of public confidence in our justice system. Now, I admit this is sounding a bit like a broken record, but this simply won't go away. So what must we do about it?
Obviously, it's not going to go away because too much damage has already been done, and the people who have been hurt by these things will continue to press for a proper inquiry to be carried out. The thing that will have to be done is to have a proper commission of inquiry set up, which involves investigators and decision makers who are not from South Australia, and they must be given the requisite support to do the proper investigations.
And neither Dr Cala nor anyone from the Forensic Science Centre would address these concerns. However, they say they have now introduced a system of peer review.